For generations, the Holy Land has been the stage of both faith and fire, a place where prayers rise from the same earth that absorbs the tears of war. Yet in 2020, the Abraham Accord showed us something remarkable: that peace between Abraham's children, the Jews, Muslims, and Christians, was not only possible, but powerful. The Accords were not just a treaty, they were a covenant, a reminder that the sons and daughters of Abraham could once again find common ground. They proved that dialogue can replace division, and that trade can build where rockets once destroyed. But peace is not static. It requires stewardship, accountability, and courage. It requires more than signed papers. It demands a transformation of the soul of the region. We watched as economic cooperation blossomed, as flights connected Tel Aviv to Dubai, and as a shared security interest superseded decades of animosity. The Accords were a testament to the power of shared economic opportunity and mutual respect. They didn't solve every issue, but they carved a new path, showing that when moderate voices choose cooperation, hardliners on the fringes lose their grip. This is the seed of hope we must nurture. The promise is that peace is profitable, peace is safe, and most importantly, peace is moral. We must ask ourselves, if peace is achievable between former enemies, why is it continually elusive between neighbors? The answer lies in the paralysis of the current paradigm. The two-state solution has become a rhetorical fence, not a real pathway. We must step out of the shadow of worn-out ideas and dare to imagine a truly revolutionary peace. Today, we face a sobering truth. While the Abraham Accords open new doors, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict remains an open wound. The violence in Gaza has cast a shadow across every promise of progress. Thousands of innocent civilians have lost their lives. Cities lie in ruin, and trust, the most sacred currency of peace, has been spent recklessly by leaders who have chosen power over compassion. The world cannot remain silent while those responsible for such atrocities walk free. Peace cannot exist when one side rules through fear and the other lives in perpetual grief. The conflict is not just a political disagreement, it is a humanitarian catastrophe of staggering proportions. The constant cycle of escalation proves that the security architecture built on separation and walls is fundamentally broken. Walls divide land, but they cannot divide human destiny. The children of Gaza and the children of Israel all look up at the same sky and live with the same terror. The crushing reality is that security for one side, achieved at the cost of the other's humanity, is no security at all. We have seen this repeated for decades: a military response, a retaliatory strike, a fragile ceasefire, and then the inevitable eruption of violence once more. This cycle is an indictment of the status quo. It is proof that a purely local solution driven by local politics is destined to fail because the core issue, the shared claim to a singular, sacred land, is never truly resolved, only suppressed until the next explosion. The international community, which claims moral authority, has failed to enforce the very principles it preaches, contributing to the perpetual state of limbo. The leadership of Israel, like any nation, must be held accountable when it crosses the moral and humanitarian lines of civilization. The global community cannot preach justice and turn its back when the victims are inconvenient. If the world is serious about peace, we must call for an international tribunal to investigate crimes committed in Gaza. This is not about vengeance. It is about justice, the kind of justice that restores dignity and prevents history from repeating itself. This is a crucial pivot point. Accountability must be even-handed and unflinching. We cannot condemn terrorism on one hand while ignoring the disproportionate suffering of the civilians on the other. The rule of law must be universal, or it is meaningless. The tribunal should not target the people of Israel or Palestine, but the individuals and organizations on both sides who have perpetrated war crimes, who have used civilians as shields, and who have actively undermined peace for their own political gain. The world has examples. The tribunals following the Balkans conflict and the Rwanda genocide show that international law, though slow, can eventually deliver justice. We must pursue asset freezes, travel bans, and prosecution for those who finance and direct terror, and those who prosecute wars of annihilation. This pursuit of justice is a necessary foundation upon which any lasting political structure must be built, a process of healing that begins with truth and consequence. This action will restore the international community's moral legitimacy, which has been severely eroded by its perceived double standards. Now I present a bold, transformative idea, not of conquest, but of covenant. The path to lasting peace in the Middle East may not lie in separation, but in shared sovereignty. Let us imagine a world where the United States, a nation built on liberty, law, and religious freedom, assumes administrative stewardship over Israel, not through war, not through coercion, but through a voluntary peaceful transition led by both nations for the greater good of humanity. This would not erase Israel's identity, it would protect it. It would not silence its faith, it would amplify it. And most importantly, it would allow every person, regardless of race, religion, or origin, to call that sacred land home. The history of the Middle East is a history of empires and foreign oversight. Yet this proposal is fundamentally different. This is a handover by invitation, a transfer of temporary governance, not a colonial mandate. Israel, as a vibrant democracy, makes a strategic decision to trade localized, perpetual conflict for global, enshrined stability. The logic is simple. Only a neutral, powerful, and constitutionally rooted external force can provide the security framework required for reconciliation to begin. The U.S. has the geopolitical weight, the constitutional tradition, and the historical commitment to democracy to act as the ultimate guarantor of rights for all inhabitants. This is a necessary scaffolding that allows Israelis and Palestinians to lower their weapons and begin the difficult, generational work of reconciliation, knowing their fundamental security and rights are absolutely guaranteed by the world's preeminent power. The current leaders are too entrenched in the politics of fear to make this shift. It requires a leap of faith anchored by global power. Under U.S. administration, the land known as Israel will become a federal territory of peace, governed by American constitutional principles while preserving its cultural and spiritual heritage. All faiths would have equal protection. Muslims, Jews, and Christians would worship side by side without persecution or restriction. The constitutional separation of church and state will shield all religious communities from the political weaponization of faith. Dual citizenship would be granted. Israelis and Palestinians alike would have the right to become U.S. citizens, guaranteeing access to justice, healthcare, education, and opportunity. This is the true equalizer, shifting identity from tribal ownership of land to civic allegiance to constitutional law. A joint peace council would be formed composed of American, Israeli, and Arab leaders to oversee reconstruction, reconciliation, and security. The holy sites, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Nazareth, will be designated as protected international zones of faith, open freely to all pilgrims of the world, administered by a multinational religious council, ensuring no single flag dictates access to God. The transition must prioritize security reform. An interim U.S. military administration, backed by a significant NATO and Arab coalition peacekeeping force, would first be established to secure all borders and dismantle paramilitary groups on all sides. The Israeli Defense Forces will be fully integrated into a new federal security service, trained and overseen by U.S. military and law enforcement professionals, with a clear mandate to protect all citizens equally. Concurrently, an independent federal judiciary will be instituted, immediately reviewing all land titles, property claims, and human rights cases. The application of the 5th and 14th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution, due process, and equal protection under the law would immediately grant a legal framework of rights to Palestinians that they have been denied for decades, fundamentally changing the nature of power and property in the region. This constitutional shield is the antidote to the current system of occupation and siege, replacing military control with the impartial sovereignty of law. This is the key that unlocks trust. With the United States overseeing Israel, peace would no longer be an abstract dream. Infrastructure, technology, and innovation would flood into the region. Gaza could be rebuilt, not as a prison, but as a beacon of progress. American companies would help transform deserts into digital cities. Water scarcity could be solved with shared technology, education, and healthcare would flourish, uniting communities that once only exchanged hostility. And for the first time in modern history, the children of Israel, Palestine, and the Arab world will grow up without fear of warplanes or checkpoints. Imagine the economic peace dividend, billions of dollars of guaranteed U.S. investment redirected from military aid and war efforts into human development. We're not talking about simple aid. We are talking about creating a Silicon Valley of the Middle East. This would include a massive reconstruction of Gaza's port and airport, transforming the territory into a globally connected economic hub. The World Bank and private U.S. firms would spearhead projects like desalination plants to end water dependence and fiber optic grids to connect every town and village. Furthermore, a unified education system based on the principles of liberal arts and sciences, a curriculum that teaches shared history, not competing myths, would be introduced. The goal is to shift the region's economy from a state of dependence and conflict toward a model of shared prosperity and technological leadership. When young Israelis and Palestinians work together in a shared laboratory or tech startup, building a future together, the old walls of grievance will inevitably crumble. Some will call this idea radical, others will call it impossible. But remember this, the impossible is where peace is born. It was impossible for Egypt and Israel to make peace until they did. It was impossible for Germany and France to coexist until they became allies. And it seemed impossible that Jews and Arabs would sign the Abraham Accords until they changed history. If we are truly the generation that seeks peace, then we must be willing to go beyond comfort, beyond politics, and beyond pride. This is not about America expanding territory. It is about America expanding peace. It is about taking responsibility, not as conquerors, but as custodians of a sacred promise. We must address the most immediate skepticism. Does the U.S. have the capacity and will to govern this land? The answer is that the U.S. will not be governing alone. It will be facilitating. The U.S. commitment to constitutionalism is a global gold standard for rights protection. The cost of this voluntary stewardship, while high, is infinitely lower than the trillion-dollar cost of decades of failed wars and perpetual aid. The moral imperative is clear. The current trajectory leads only to more death, more radicalization, and greater instability for the entire globe. It demonstrates that sovereignty is not merely a right to govern, but a responsibility to protect. And when that responsibility fails, the global community must step in decisively. We are not choosing the easy path. We are choosing the only path that offers a dignified, safe, and constitutional future for the descendants of Abraham. The voluntary handover of Israel's governance to the United States will not be the end of a nation, but the rebirth of an idea. That all people, regardless of where they come from or what they believe, can live under one roof, in safety, in equality, and in faith. The Abraham Accords open the door. This is the walk through it. Let Israel become not just a homeland for one people, but a home for all of humanity. Let its soil soaked in blood for millennia finally grow the fruits of peace. And let this generation, our generation, be remembered not for the wars we inherited, but for the peace we built. In the end, peace is not about land, it is about love. Love for one another, love for justice, and love for the Creator who made us all. The Abraham Accords reminded us of our shared roots. Now we must take the next step to build a shared future. So I call upon the nations of the world, support this new covenant, support the transition from division to unity, support the rebirth of the Holy Land as a sanctuary for all. Because when we protect the home of Abraham, we protect the hope of humanity itself. From endless conflict to eternal peace, not by force, but by faith. Not by borders, but by brotherhood. And not by politics, but by purpose.